Hi, everyone. My name is Randy Oliver. I'm a professional beekeeper and bee researcher from California. I run the website scientificbeekeeping.com. I'd like to talk to you today about Varroa management. We're constantly learning about Varroa management and better ways to do it. We're pretty successful with it in our operation. So I've broken it down to a number of concepts. And first, let me give some background here. That beekeeping used to be much easier. You could just put some bees in a box and walk away from it, and you still have bees in that hive years later. But then we humans now we're experiencing a virus pandemic from the coronavirus. This affects human beings. We have had a pandemic in the honeybees for a few decades now. They're in the middle of an evolutionary transition, and it was kicked off when the Varroa mite jumped host from Apis cerana to Apis mellifera. Deformed wing virus is a normally relatively benign insect virus. It can be transmitted transovarially as the queen lays the eggs. They get on the outside of the egg coating, and the larva, when it consumes the eggshell, gets infected by the virus. But the bees normally suppress the virus in their bodies, and it's relatively benign. That is, unless that bee has been fed upon by the Varroa mite. The Varroa mite is a whole new concept for the honeybee. Caught it off guard. The Western honeybee hasn't had any blood-sucking mites. So, well, I guess the tracheal mite. It hasn't had this mite that injects virions directly into the hemolymph, into the circulatory system of the bees, and also consumes and destroys some of the fat bodies, the immune system within the bees. So this combination of this mite affecting the immunity of the bees and the injecting these virions tip it over for deformed wing virus. It's called this because of these typical deformed wings, but most bees, infected bees, will not exhibit deformed wings. You may not see that actually much in your hive, although the virus can still be causing problems. What you'll see is the older larvae and pupae dying from the virus instead. And when the transmission gets very high, when you get to a high mite rate, you start seeing wholesale death of the larvae and the pupae. We call it parasitic mite syndrome. And the final sign is once the colony collapses, you'll see bees unable to emerge from the cells and these telltale white fecal deposits from the mites at the top of the cells, the ceilings of the cells. So concept number one is that Varroa management is really vector management, controlling the vector of deformed wing virus. When we have a vector and host, such as malaria and human beings, humans don't transmit malaria to one another without the vector. So when you have a malaria epidemic going on, it can be halted simply by controlling the vector, reducing the number of vectors to stop transmission. And we try to do the same thing with the Varroa mite. This is about reducing the transmission by controlling the vector. And here's why. Here's this graph with this red plot being the mites per 100 bees, the infestation rate of the adult bees in the hive. And the blue and the green are the plots for the prevalence of highly infected worker bees for either deformed wing virus in the blue or the paralytic viruses in the green. And as you can see, is when the mite population stays down, the virus epidemic is very small, very low in the colony. But as the mite population infestation rate starts to increase, the viruses take right off. And when they get to a high point, then the colony starts to collapse. Okay, concept number two, that the number of necessary mite reductions, and that could be treatments or some other way of reducing the number of mites in the hive, that you need to keep your colonies alive is dependent upon the number of months that a colony is rearing brood during that year. The more months of brood rearing, the more difficult it's going to be to control Varroa and take more treatments. The thing to keep in mind is that when you look at sealed brood, you're looking at mite food. This is the only place that the Varroa mite can reproduce is in the sealed brood. So if you see sealed brood, assume that mite reproduction is taking place. So this is a graph I made showing at the typical rate of increase of Varroa mites in a colony rearing brood for a 6-month period. So if you started with one mite, you'd wind up with 50 times that one after the end of 6 months. This would be the expected increase from reproduction. And once the brood is gone and you go into your dearth or your winter when there's no brood, the mites will decrease at a much lower rate, maybe about 0.5 to 1% a day from natural mortality. So you wouldn't quite get back down to 0 or 1 again, but you'd end the year at 20 times the count. So sometimes the colony might make it through the first year with Varroa, but then when you start with 20 times the next year, it's not going to make it through the second year. So this shows a comparison for different areas. If you live in the north, where you may only have 6 months with brood, the Varroa increase will come up a little bit and then drop back down, almost back down to the start, as you just saw. If you have 8 months of brood, then you start to see Varroa really get up here, getting up to 200 times the starting count. 10 months of brood, which is more southerly, we start getting up maybe up to 700 times the starting count. And 12 months of brood, which you may have in Florida, California, or Texas, now you're getting up to 1,000 times the starting count of mites. And they just go crazy. Much more difficult Varroa management in these longer summer environments. The other thing to keep in mind is that shorter winters mean more Varroa increase. So here's a graph from NOAA right here for the average California temperature, November through January, from 1895 until 2020. I overlaid a regression line of my lifetime since 1951. And you can see, I've been in recent years, asking my sons, guys, am I just getting older, or is it hotter now than it used to be during the summer? And looking at this graph, this is for the winter, yes, it is indeed getting hotter on the average. But notice there's some years that are much warmer winters and some years that are warmer winters. Years following a warm winter, you're going to have a shorter break for Varroa, so you're going to have Varroa brood rearing, so Varroa is going to be more successful reproducing. And you're going to have more mite problems then. So following a long cold winter, Varroa will be less of an issue. Following a warm winter, Varroa will be more of an issue. What you can use is download this free model if you got Excel or on your computer. And I created this. It's a free download available at my website. And you can enter your mite treatments right in here. So you can put in your reduction, say a 70% reduction here or a 90% reduction right here. And try to avoid your colony crashing here. What this shows is the adult bee population in the hive here. This shows the amount of sealed brood in the hive, and this is the proportion of sealed brood that is infested by a mite. This is your mite population, and this is your a mite wash, so a half cup of mites in a wash, alcohol wash, or a Dawn detergent wash right here. And this is all customizable for where you live, your starting mite population, your amount of mite immigration. You can change all those. So in an area where you have a relatively short summer, you may get by with 2 90% mite reductions over the course of the year. So we started with 50 mites in the hive here. We ended with 57. You kind of got up here to danger area, but you might be able to get by with just 2 reductions per year. If you're in an area like a Mediterranean climate, then it's going to take more. It's going to take 3 reductions minimum, 90% reductions in the mite, with moderate mite immigration to control the mite during the year. And even then, you started with 50 mites, we ended with 167 mites. So the next year, you're going to have much more of a problem with the mites if you don't do more than that. California, for us almond pollinators, we're talking 4 good reductions a year to get the mites, keep mites in control. Okay, bro, concept number 3. You get the most bang for your buck by getting the mite counts down early in the spring. Because mites reproduce at different rates in the hive. And they reproduce most efficiently early in the season when there's drone brood being reared and a very large proportion of brood to adult worker bees. So I've graphed this out to show you So this is your percent change in population for each time period. The red track is for Varroa, and the yellow one is for the honeybees. If there's no change in population, it would be at the blue line. So anything below the blue line, you're dropping in population. Anything above, you're gaining in population. And the higher above the blue line, the more rapid your rate of gain. So this is your rate of gain during any time period. Notice the rate of that people sometimes are under the misconception that the bees take off ahead of the mite in the spring, and then the mites catch up later. And this shows you that's not true. The mites take off out of the gate, are ahead of the bees from the beginning, and they reproduce faster than the bees for the entire season. And then what we notice them catching, what seems to be a catch-up, is because the bees drop their population off ahead of the mites. And you see this mite population really showing. Okay, concept number 4. The higher the mite population gets, and the more mites in the hive, the more rapid its rate of increase due to exponential growth. So I've done some plots right here with the starting mite population being at either 10 mites down here or 150 mites in the hive. That's how many mites in the hive we're starting with. And the number of months. If you only started with 10 mites in the hive, you had no immigration, Varroa at 7 months would still not be a problem. That colony could make it through the winter, the first winter. It would be less than 1,000 mites in that hive. But what you see is, if you start with a higher number, like 150 mites in a hive, which is a very, very reasonable amount, as long as the number is fairly low, the rate of increase, the amount of rise per month, is not that steep. But when you start getting up to having several thousand mites in the hive, then your rate of increase is very, very fast. So this is why we suddenly, at the end of the season, it seems like Varroa is just exploding, because you actually do have a faster rate of increase when you have more mites in the hive. That's absolute numbers of mites in the hive. So what you can do is, if you hop on it early in the spring, even with 3 relatively low efficacy treatments, I put in 3 80% efficacy treatments, you're able to control Varroa. We start with 100 mites here and end with 98 mites. So the trick is to get them down low in the season and keep them down. The main mistake the beekeepers make is doing a little bit too little, too late. So they wait for the mite population to get way up here. They do a strong treatment, say a 90% treatment right here, and get the mite count down, but the virus epidemic has already taken off and the colony will crash. Much better to get that spring treatment, keep those mites down throughout the season. The other thing is, we do thousands and thousands of mite washes in our operation. We really, with all my experimentation and just our management, we really keep an eye on these mite counts. What we see over and over again is that once the mite wash count in a half cup of bees exceeds about 15 mites, those colonies don't look sick. There's no way to tell that they have a problem, but they are no longer as productive as the colonies that have lower mite counts. So you're going to get much more productivity out of your hives if you manage the mites. Next concept: never take your eyes off of Varroa. If you're waiting to see mites on the top of the bees, you got to realize this is a rare mite to see on top of the bees. Most of the mites are on the underside of the bees. That's where they prefer to feed. The second thing is that most of the mites are hiding in the brood. And on my model, it shows you the percent of mites in the brood at any point in time. So you can see in the springtime, you can have up to almost 80% of the mites in the brood. Most of the rest of the year, it's about 50 to 60% of the mites are in the brood at any time. You'll also be able to see signs of deformed wings as the mite population gets up there and the viruses take off. So on the ground, you may see these crawlers with deformed wings walking. And this tells you that you have a deformed wing virus issue in the hive. You may see these dying pupae or some bees with deformed wings. But again, I would not wait until you see this size, this sign right here. I would do the monitoring. So how to monitor? One way is sticky board counts, counting natural mite fall. But these are really, really hard to interpret. And if you're over 40, it's hard to count all the dang mites in the hive trash or looking for them. I do a lot of sticky board counts for experimentation, and they're great for scientific studies, collecting data, but for monitoring, I find them be very neat interpretation because it depends upon the amount of brood that's hatching out that day, what size the cluster is. And many, they're very time consuming, and you have to come put them in and come back the next day and take them out. A lot of people use they're adverse to having to sacrifice 300 bees for a mite wash, so they use the sugar shake. I've tested this extensively, the sugar shake, and doing the full 1 to 2 minute roll set in the sugar and let the roll the bees set and then shake. And the blue columns are where I did a gentle shake for a full time 60 seconds. And the red columns are where I did a really hard, vigorous shake up and down, really beat those bees up bad for a full 60 seconds. I'll tell you right now, 60 seconds shaking seems like an eternity. Most people will not shake for 60 seconds. Then this shows my recovery rate. What percent of the mites on the bees I actually recovered off the bees. You can see with either the vigorous or the gentle or the vigorous shake, sometimes I recovered only as much as 50% of the mites on the bees. So I could really underestimate my mite infestation rate. Only with the very vigorous shake, and only in 2 out of 10 in this trial, did I get over 95% recovery of the mites in the bee sample. I find it's much quicker and more accurate to monitor infestation rate of scooping a half cup of bees. And I have a number of articles on my website, some recent ones in 2020, that give you tips for how to do alcohol rapid mite washing. And we used detergent for a long time. Now what we're using, we used alcohol. Now we're using detergent, Dawn detergent. We find it works very well. On my website are plans for a very simple mite wash cup. The trick is you don't need to shake it. If you shake it, you just keep stirring the mites up in the bees. You want to swirl it so the mites can drop down and fall to the bottom. With Dawn detergent, it takes very, very little agitation to drop all the mites off. If you do use either alcohol or Dawn detergent, and I have articles showing I've tested a number of different washing fluids. If you're going to use alcohol, you want to use 91% alcohol. You get much better recovery with a high-proof alcohol or the Dawn Ultra detergent. With the detergent, you're going to see these bubbles on the top. So I like to view from the bottom. I pull the bees out above, so I have light sky above. Use a 10S magnifying mirror underneath, 6-inch diameter, and about 4 inches below the cup. And then you can look down and very quickly see the mites and count them. We use the setup here. I have a dedicated Honda CRV pull-out table with a leg on it, the holder that holds the cup and the mirror here for counting, and we use color-coded cups, and I keep track of all of our mite washes as we make them. What you want to see is you want to see very few mites in the cups. We don't want to see more than 1 or 2 mites in the alcohol wash or detergent wash in the springtime, and will allow it to climb up to about 6 mites, which is about a 2% infestation rate of the adult bees during the summer. Since we start seeing 6 or more mites in washes, we hop on treating our hives. Concept number 7, late season drift of mites. So here's some data from the experiment I did where I was able to, I counted mite immigration coming from other hives in a number of hives. This was the highest one in the yard on this particular test. And this is your sticky board natural mite fall. I did it twice a week, so 3 to 4 days apart. So what you see up here is you've got over 40 mites coming in twice a week. So that's over 80 to 90 mites a week coming in on these weeks. Most all that happened from mid-September to early November, and we got 500 mites coming from outside this hive. And we were marking bees in this yard, and these mites were mostly not from within our yard. They came in from other colonies of bees somewhere away, and we really don't know quite where because there weren't other beekeepers around us. So we're thinking they probably came from escaped swarm colonies that had high mite levels. And so I ran a simulation here with starting with 100 mites and 1 strong treatment right here. And this colony has barely made it into the winter, with 500, 450 mites right here. But if I add, this was a 0 mite immigration. If I put in a higher level, so I had 500 mites coming into the hive, which is what we saw in that last hive, then it would likely have crashed during the winter. So that immigration can really hurt you after you do a treatment in August. This is when you get the high immigration coming in. Concept number 8. Identify those mite disseminators. We learned this when we first start doing serious mite washing later in the season. And this is 2015. We decided, wow, I built a mechanical agitator here, and we said for the first time we started washing a bunch of hives. So we did 200 hives on this test, and this just opened our eyes to Varroa management. And these hives had all been treated in August and September. No, I'm sorry, in June and August. So this is September. And what this is the histogram of the distribution of counts. So out of that 203 hives, over 100 had mite counts between 0 and 5 mites in a wash. Another 40 some were between 6 and 10. Now we'd be happy with all of these because we're going to do an oxalic acid dribble in December. So these would all be fine, mites under control. And this represented 75% of our hives had the mites well under control. But then we started having some that the mites weren't under control, and some really crazy outliers way out here, some very, very high wash counts that we had no idea, because we'd already treated these hives twice during the summer. When I did the math, I found out that these hives here represented 25% of all of our hives, but they contain 75% of all the mites. And these some people call these mite bombs. Out in Mediterranean areas, you don't have bombs. I haven't found that there's more distribution from the mites from the hives as they're collapsing as there were when they're just alive. So I like to call them mite disseminators. So and what we see is we have this constant, it's like a diffusion. These bees are just always drifting from hive to hive. You get the high mite hives drifting high mite bees to the low mite hives. And this makes a huge difference. Okay, so how do we manage the mite? And back to the last thing, what that means is talk to your neighbors. Make sure your neighbors are controlling their mites too. Otherwise, you're going to have their problem. And the other thing is we don't ever want to have a swarm escape from our colonies, because that swarm will later become a mite disseminator coming back, so the mites build up in it. So if you're going to control any kind of agricultural pests, what you have is an integrated pest management pyramid. And typically you start with a cultural or biological stock, so a resistant plant or a resistant animal. Then you do biotechnical and physical methods, mechanical ways of removing the pest or deterring it. And then you do the monitoring all the time. And if you reach the action threshold, and our action threshold was 1 mite in the spring or 6 mites in the summer, then you go to biopesticides, something that's readily degradable, a natural type of treatment. And then as a last resort, you go to synthetic chemicals up here at the top. Unfortunately, in most countries, when Varroa showed up, they just skipped all these steps and went straight to synthetic chemicals. And now we're seeing, as these synthetic miticides are failing in most of the countries, we're having to learn to use the biopesticides. Luckily, in our operation, we got the jump on this, and we gave up the last of the synthetic chemicals in 2001. So we've run our commercial operation using nothing but the biopesticides since then. Concept number 9. Okay, let's start at the bottom. Use resistance talk and biotechnical methods. Our eventual goal, of course, is to keep bees that control Varroa on their own. And that is possible. It's happened in any number of countries, South Africa being noteworthy on this. The beekeepers there never did treat their hives, and within 6 years, they don't even consider Varroa to be a problem. It's there, but it just doesn't cause problems. So what we're working on here, a number of us, is selective breeding for Varroa resistance. And there's a lot of different ways that the bees can be resistant to mites. And a very good article was published recently. If you want to read one here, it's a free download of different ways that they can come up with resistance. One of the ones that we're seeing in many races of bees or strains of bees that are showing resistance is this uncapping, recapping behavior. And I see this in our own bees. And John Harbaugh and Jeff Harris back in 1999 said, just for selective breeding, just compare the growth of the mite populations in each colony and see which ones are more resistant to mites. You don't have to know how they do it, just that they do it. So I've been walking the walk here in California to see how well it will work, let everybody know whether my successes and my failures. In one of our typical non-resistant colonies, they're going to build up to this very high mite levels. You know, by September they'll be up to the 50s, you know, or better. In our mite-resistant colonies, what we do is we'll do we start them as nukes in all of our colonies as nukes in April. We wait until June, early July. We do our first test, and if they have a mite count below 1, we keep them in as breeders. If not, we go ahead and treat the rest of the operation. Just leave the breeder colonies right in the same yard. We do a second test a month later, third test, a fourth test, and we want to keep those mite counts, see them way, way down here. If they fail at any point, they're taken out of the breeder pool and they're treated, and we don't lose any colonies at all. So there's no colony loss involved in this. And then we'll let them get up to maybe a mite count of 9 in November, but we expect them to bring it back down before we take the next wash next April when we're grafting. And some colonies just laugh at Varroa. Not so much this year, but the last year, but the year before, we had a lot of colonies that 5 mite washes had 4 out of 5 zeros. We may get a count of 1 or 2 here, and then bring them back down again. And one of my assistants' books said, "Zeros are heroes," because we were seeing so many of these beautiful zero counts. And they were beautiful colonies of bees. Now you do notice missing cells here, and I'm thinking that's probably from the uncapping, recapping behavior, but clearly nice, healthy brood. Honey producers, gentle as can be, we don't see any trade-off whatsoever in breeding for resistant bees. They're as good as any other bees in all other traits. They just manage the mites by themselves. And oftentimes, they're the best producers in the yard because they don't have to deal with the virus issues that the other colonies do because they keep their mite levels so low. But progress has been slow. We started this selective breeding program in 2017. Less than 1% of our colonies passed the test. It started to climb, 2%, 3.5%. We were up to almost 7% in 2020. Dropped down a bit last year, so we'll see what happens this next year. So I can't say our bees are mite resistant across the board. We have less than 10% showing strong resistance. But we're aiming for this to get up to 95% or better. We'll see what happens. But I can predict the future that someday Varroa will only be a minor problem. But until then, we need to monitor and treat. So here's an concept number 10, treatment-free beekeeping. And going treatment-free is no excuse for practicing poor animal husbandry. This puppy suffering from a mite infestation. And what you do is you would treat this, and then you neuter the puppy to make sure they didn't pass those non-resistant genes onto the next generation. Most dogs are resistant to the Demodex mite, but sometimes you'll find one that's not resistant. Now just imagine that if this dog owner put a leash on this dog, drug it up to his feet, said, "We're going to go out for a walk." And just before they went out the door, the owner put on her a T-shirt that says, "I'm a proud treatment-free puppy keeper," and then walked down the street with this poor infested dog. What do you think the other dog owners would think of that dog owner? First, they'd want to keep their dogs away so they didn't pick up mites from this infested dog, and they'd probably call Humane Association or Animal Control for the animal abuse by the owner. And I don't see any difference with beekeeping. If you're going to keep a livestock, take care of your livestock. In agriculture, generally, growers that don't manage their pests, they hurt their neighbors. So if this is a treatment-free apple grower, it's going to hurt the other apple growers around. It becomes a nuisance. And what we see with Varroa is that you have this drift of bees and mites, and I've documented lots of drift to apiaries a half mile away from where I had the marked bees in the hives. So lots of drift with mites. The point is that selective breeding is not done at the colony level, it's done at the queen level. Our resistance is at the queen level. Allowing colonies to collapse is counterproductive because now you have a collapsed colony. You don't have bees to start fresh colonies next season to propagate the genetics of the good queens. So no reason to allow colonies to collapse. What you do if the mites get too high, either euthanize the colony or hit it hard with formic acid, knock out the queen, put a more resistant queen in there, and start over. The formic acid is totally natural treatment, doesn't contaminate the combs or leave any residues, totally organic. So really no excuse to ever allow a colony to collapse. So please don't use treatment-free, being treatment-free as an excuse for neglectful beekeeping. If you're going to be treatment-free, that's your business. But if the mite levels get high, either euthanize or hit that colony with formic acid so you don't create a nuisance for everybody else and make the rest of the hives in the environment suffer. So work for the benefit of everybody, please. So biotechnical methods. Drone trapping. We have a drone frame, a trap frame in every one of our colonies. We use them to produce a lot of drones, but mainly to control where the bees make drone comb. We sell a lot of nukes, and people don't want the drone comb in their frames that we're selling them. And this helps a bit, but not a whole lot. Thermal treatment. And there's lots of claims for this, the number of devices for thermal treatment. And yes, indeed, you can do that. I have 2 articles out right now in press. I think one just came out in the American Bee Journal, where I tested thermal treatment on 4 hives and then went back in those hives and dissected the brood and found surprisingly poor mite kill. So the treatment device I used didn't quite have a temperature quite high enough to really kill the mites. Most of them in the brood still survived. And of the 4 hives, when I did the mite wash counts, they did indeed go down for 15 days. But if those mites had been sterilized, then the mite count would have kept going down. But instead, it rebounded quickly, showing that, it worked, but really didn't do a whole lot. So this is an option, thermal treatment, for those who are just totally averse to adding any substance to a beehive to control the mites. I doubt that commercial beekeepers will be much interested in it, though it's very labor intensive. Springtime splitting. We split all of our hives in the spring. We make about 3,000 nukes each spring. And we set up an assembly line here, and we work away from where the parent hive was. So any bee that's going to sting you will fly back to where the parent hive was, and you can work the bees quickly and easily here without getting stung up. What we do then is we create an induced brood break by starting our nukes with queen cells rather than a laying queen. And I have an article on this on my website, simple early treatment of nukes. And then on day 18 or 19, we hit them with a squirt of oxalic acid. So it costs us less than a nickel, costs us 5 seconds in time to do that. We start out with very clean hives every spring. The other thing you can do is before swarming, you can separate out from a hive the sealed brood and the open brood. So sealed brood containing mites in the brood. Split the hive into 2, one with the sealed brood, one with the open brood. Put the old queen in the one with the open brood and hit it with oxalic acid, and that will kill most all the mites. Put a queen cell in the one with the sealed brood, and then on day 18 or 19, come back and hit that with oxalic acid, and that will kill almost all the mites. I have this on my website on the first year beekeeping page to describe the method, but you can avoid swarming, requeen your colony, control Varroa, and then put the 2 halves back together and get a super strong colony to make a bunch of honey that year, or you can sell one of them off. So you can kill 3 birds with 1 stone by using this method right here. Worked very well for the backyard beekeeper. Okay, treatments. Concept 11, there are limitations for each treatment, best windows for using each kind of treatment. Some treatments need to be removed, like amitraz, 2 weeks before you put your honey supers on. Oxalic can only be used to register for use in the early spring or the late fall. Formic acid can be used while the honey supers are on, as can hop guard. Thymol cannot, and because this suppresses brood rearing, it's really best used late in the season rather than early in the season. As far as the synthetic miticides, the one that's used most now is the Apivar, using amitraz as the active ingredient, time-released amitraz. Apistan may also work, that's fluvalinate. The mites developed a lot of resistance to it, but they are likely losing that resistance now because it's not used so much. The disadvantages are it takes up to 4 strips of this, and it's not a rapid knockdown, and it is a bit pricey. So if I were going to use Apivar, I would want to use it on nukes first thing in the spring, and 1 strip in a nuke will do a very good job of getting you down to that very low starting mite level. You can see here over the weeks the amount of mite kill, and you get first 3 weeks you get most of your mite mortality. So 3 weeks to really have high efficacy, and then it takes about 8 weeks to really get them down. So the Apivar strips are not the best treatment for late in the season with high mite counts. They work much better as an early season treatment. HopGuard, hops beta acids, organically approved, effective, very effective when there's no brood in the hive, so really good for a late fall or wintertime treatment. If there is brood, you need to repeat the applications of these strips. Essential oils. There's lots of essential oils, and beekeepers throw all kinds of them in the hive. The bees in general really dislike essential oils, but the one that has been proven to be effective is thymol, very well proven. There's others that may hold promise, but so far not much good data supporting them. So I'd stick with the thymol. We use Apiguard gel ourselves every single year. There's other forms of thymol that you could also use. We find that we put an 1.5-inch tall rim on every hive, put on the full 50-gram treatment of on top of the second brood chamber under a lid, even in hot weather, and come back after 10 days and repeat it. If the bees do not physically remove all the gel off the card, it will not be efficacious. So you have to have bees up close to the card. Otherwise, there's it's the physical movement of the gel that gives you the efficacy. So we repeat it again at 10 days, and we have had very good luck with this for a lot of years. Recent study out of Canada shows extended release thymol and glycerin, and that's very promising right here. So we'll see if that gets registered for use. So pros and cons of thymol. Whoa. I'm trying to move around a bar here that you guys don't see. The upsides and relatively inexpensive, and especially this experimental extended release. I'll show this in a. It showed sounds very promising. It does suppress brood rearing, so we use it in August when we really don't want the colonies rearing brood anyway. Of the organic acids, there's formic and oxalic. Formic vaporizes at ambient temperature, but it also penetrates the cappings. Oxalic does not vaporize unless you heat it up. Formic acid is the acid that ants give off, and bees have dealt with this forever, so they do just fine with it. And again, it will penetrate the cappings and kill the brood on the pupae in the cappings. It also gives the colonies a fresh start. The queen stops laying for about 5 days, and when she starts laying again, you normally get very nice brood patterns. Formic Pro is a time release product on the market. You can apply it 2 different ways. 1 strip repeated after 10 days, or 2 strips applied at once. We find that the 1 strip repeated gives us good mite control, but has less adverse effects on the queens in the hive. And here's the 2 strips at once going in right here. There's also any number of unapproved alternative application methods of formic, but I'm not going to go into those. I got a lot of discussion on my website. The downside of formic is it can cause the bees to lose their queen. We're not quite sure whether they killed the queen or what's the effect directly on the queen, but there is often a supersedure, especially of the poor queens. So backyard beekeeper, you have this option. You can pull the queen out, put her in a cage, stick her in a small nuke, or just keep her inside the house with some attendants for the first few days of treatment until the formic vapors dissipate somewhat, and then stick the queen back in the colony. So pros and cons of formic. You can use it while the supers are on. It does kill mites under the cappings, no residues, no problem with contamination, and works very well. But it is a bit tricky to use, and we find the handling issues. The Formic Pro strips are very, very nice. Here's my grandson with showing oxalic acid. This is Buttercup oxalis, and if you're in California, you grow up sucking on these stems. They taste like a lemonade. That's a solution of sugar and oxalic acid. And here I am applying the dribble method of oxalic acid. You put 5 milliliters in between the frames wherever there's bees. And you can, if you just Google oxalic acid treatment table, this table will come up and show you how to mix this. We apply it with a garden sprayer at a low pressure, so it just puts out a stream, and we time that stream, calibrate it so that 1 second down here will put out 5 milliliters. So that takes you, if you have 10 frames of bees, it takes you 10 seconds to put it on. If you got 15 frames of bees, it takes you 15 seconds. So very, very quick. And we do a lot of them, 2 guys. One guy tips it back, and the other one applies it. Here's my sons, Eric and Ian, putting it on with a winter cluster here in December here in California. It gives really cleans the hives up every winter, so they get a clean start in the spring. Now in Italy, Spain, some of the European countries, where all the synthetic miticides are largely failing to control Varroa now, they're going back to the organic acids, and they're doing induced brood breaks using specialized cages. The problem is when you keep the queen in the cage, sometimes the bees don't like that and they may supersede her. So an alternative method is to make these queen excluder division boards. We custom make these. We use these to confine a queen to 1 frame, our breeder queens, so we have all larvae of the same age to graft. So we use these queen excluder division boards all the time. So we're going to put 2 of those division boards in with a frame of drawn comb in between them. So the queen is now confined to this frame right here. You leave her on there for 2 weeks. And I made up this diagram so that you, on day 0, you restrict the queen in here, confine her, and she starts laying eggs. When 8 days after she starts laying eggs, the mice can start entering that brood, and she's pretty much going to fill that frame full in 3 to 4 days, and then can't lay much anymore because she has all the cells filled. So for those days, the mice will be entering these cells. Then at day 14, you can release the queen. Now, if all the brood at that time is sealed, you can remove the frame then. If you still have open brood on that frame, there will still be mice entering it, so you can leave the frame in clear until day 21. The queen's then loose in the hive, she's laying again, but no mites can enter those cells because they're not old enough. Then the treatment window is on day 21, when if you pull the trap frame out, there'll be no sealed brood in the hive at all for 1 day, and you give them an oxalic acid dribble and knock out all the mites. So just the confining of the queen in induced brood break, you'll get a 25 to 30% mite reduction just by that alone. You can get a 95% or better if you also use the oxalic acid dribble afterwards. And there's the oxalic acid going on. I'll just review here. Day 1, confine the queen. Day 14, release the queen. Day 21, remove the trap frame and dribble with oxalic acid. Oxalic acid vaporization. Lots of people in some areas are using this. It's cheap, it's quick. It's not approved for use during the summer or when honey's on the hive. So I tested to see how efficacious it was using one of the fast acting devices here, and found out each one of these triangles here is a vaporization that I gave to the hive. This is the mite counts from it. You can see it takes a lot of vaporizations every 10 days to bring that mite count way down. So I was disappointed by the efficacy of the vaporizations. You'd have to be vaporizing your hives all the time to keep the mite counts down if they have brood. Now, if they're broodless, it works very, very well. One vaporization will kill most of the mites, but not when they have brood in them. The most promising thing I see coming up is this extended release oxalic acid. The Argentinians, the Magic Group, came up with this concept with the cardboard strips with oxalic acid dissolved in glycerin to release it. I've been testing, and in the middle of testing, we tested with these cellulose sponges this last year, and this was the most efficacious of all the summertime mite treatments that we found. It is not authorized for use. I have an authorization to do this, so I only show you this as a progress report on my research, not as a recommendation to do this yourselves. It's not approved yet. But I think it really could fit into mite management. In our experimental hives, it's working very well. So we're very happy with it, but it's still in development, looking to get it registered. Oxalic, we really like oxalic. We use oxalic quite a bit. Inexpensive, very, very safe to use it. And in the extended release with the glycerin, it's the safest of any application methods for the applicator. It's temperature independent. It's worked for years. Unlikely the mites are going to be able to evolve resistance to it. But you have to, if there's brood present, you need to have some method of extending their release. Okay, concept number 12, rotate your treatments to avoid resistance. And this has been pointed out years ago by Lodasani about you need to interrupt your treatments. So here'd be a rotation if you had amatraz in the rotation. Our rotation is with these three in our operation without the amatraz. But if you do that, you're hitting the mites from a different direction each time, and less chance for them to ever evolve resistance to any of these. In our operation, which we've used for many years, we start with a low mite level from the winter dribble, split our colonies in April and with the induced brood break, use an oxalic acid dribble. In July, early July, when the honey supers are still on, we hit them with a formic acid pad, just knock the mites back a little bit. We get the honey off, hit them with the thymol treatment, Apogard, and then we start feeding protein to build them up in the fall and the oxalic acid dribble. And we have low mite levels for the entire season. And this has worked well for us year after year after year. So I can tell you right now, it's not difficult to control mites inexpensively in your operation. No synthetic miticides, and do it year after year. So go ahead, you can use my Varroa model right here. You can kill 100 hives a night, doesn't cost you anything. Playing around, figuring out, with your own operation, and you're customizing it for the type of colony you have, whether you're starting with a nuke, whether you're in a high latitude or low latitude environment, what you could use at various times until you come up with a scheme where your ending count is not above your starting count. Okay, concept number 13. Control Varroa. Provide good nutrition and most of your beekeeping problems go away. There's my simple recipe for successful beekeeping. Keep young, vigorous queens. Queens run out of sperm if they're laying at a high rate, 18 months or so, and the queens are going to be superseded. So just go ahead and plan on keeping young queens. Provide good nutrition, supplemental feeding if necessary, and control Varroa all year. If you don't wait to control Varroa, you start the spring controlling Varroa and keep it down all year, and your hives will be much healthier. You want to minimize toxins in your hive. This is why we avoid the buildup of synthetic miticides in our hives. And toxins also be toxic plants, natural toxins, or agricultural chemicals. So keep that as low as you can. The main thing is to be proactive rather than reactive, especially with Varroa. The more proactive you are, the more successful you'll be. It's much more difficult to do reactive mite treatment after the mites have gotten ahead of you. And that's it. All right. Well, thank you, folks, and best of luck to you with your beekeeping. All right. Hope that helps you out somewhat with Varroa management. It can be done, and it can be done relatively inexpensive. You just have to be on it. The big thing we need to do is to come up with the mechanical agitators for people. Doing it by hand if you have more than a few hives is very tough. We use all battery-powered, custom-built agitators. I'm working on designs. I hope to publish some plans for inexpensive plans that everybody can build them for themselves, because that really makes a huge difference. All right, best of luck to you all. Happy beekeeping to everyone.